Good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us today online and in person. My name is Neha. I'm with the Hands of Mother Earth Alliance, in short, Home Alliance. This press conference is organized by the Global Forest Coalition, which is a member of the Hands of Mother Earth Alliance. Before we start, I want to declare I have no conflict of interest and no ties to the fossil fuel industry. We are here at the UN climate negotiations in Bonn, where critical discussions are happening on climate action. Yet, alongside these discussions, we are seeing a growing push for risky and unproven geoengineering technologies being presented as climate solutions. Across the global south, these technologies are being advanced along with policy spaces like the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is creating new entry points through the carbon markets. We also want to recall the important leadership of Africa in this. Last year, the African Ministerial Conference on Environment, AMSEN, took a clear position signaling and calling for the non-use of solar geoengineering. This sends a very strong signal that our regions are not open to experimentation or to be used as testing grounds. Today, voices from Africa, Asia, and Latin America will speak on the realities on the ground, highlighting how geoengineering produces colonial patterns of exploitation, aims to turn the global south into a testing ground, and why they are rejecting these risky and speculative schemes. With this, I hand over to the first speaker, Kwame Kaponzo from the Global Forest Coalition.
Thank you, Neha. I'm speaking on behalf of Global Forest Coalition, and also I'm coordinating the Home Alliance African Working Group. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is entering fast and strongly into its phase of implementation. Countries, especially the Global South countries, express their willingness to implement carbon market. And carbon markets projects are cursing Africa. Local communities, women, and youths are experiencing already land and forest grabbing, forced displacements, water and soil pollution due to the use of chemicals to grow monoculture plantations. Carbon market schemes is undermining traditional and local knowledge in forest conservation field. Thus, the right to food and livelihood are violated through restrictions driven by carbon projects reducing local food production, increasing food prices, right to health and healthy environments are abused due to large-scale monoculture plantations with agrochemical inputs and loss of biodiversity. So land-based carbon credits rarely provide real or durable emissions reductions due to impermanence, over-crediting, and unverifiable baselines. So market revenue fluctuates and are largely captured by intermediaries. Carbon markets cannot substitute predictable, public, right-based climate finance for food systems. Community payments are often small, unstable, and insufficient to offset long-term constraints. So outside Africa, we also documented some violence around Article 6. So a report on the carbon credit in Myanmar exposes a profound gap between the promises of Article 6.4, and the realities on the ground, raising fundamental questions about the credibility of the UN's new carbon market mechanism. So particular concern is raised about the project's implementation in Myanmar, Central Dry Zone, including Sagaing region, which has become the epicenter of resistance to military rule, and one of the regions most heavily affected by violence since the 2021 coup. According to the reports, the townships where the project was implemented experienced thousands of conflict-related incidents during the project's crediting periods, including airstrikes, artillery attacks on schools and health facilities, and widespread displacement. So Sagin alone now account for more than a third of Myanmar internally displaced population, while women and girls in the region have faced alarming levels of conflict-related sexual violence. So the dynamic of carbon offsetting, carbon sequestration, and selling of carbon credit could also open doors to geoengineering technologies. It is not clear visible on the agenda of the negotiations and dialogues, but it is there implicitly through the expansion of tree plantations and biomass burning with the intention of the use of BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, biochar, direct air capture technologies, and others to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the demand for large-scale removals to generate credit establishes political momentum for geoengineering, such as massive afforestation that can severely disrupt food production systems and water cycles. Carbon market does act as enablers for dangerous technologies. Carbon market is the continuation of nature and people's exploitation. It is a distraction to climate action. It is a new form of imperialism and exploitation without responsibility. Africa must not be taken in or drawn into a new cycle of colonialism disguised in this wave of carbon markets and carbon credits. Polluters are promoting geoengineering technologies to maintain the carbon market schemes which continue to worsen in the climate crisis. The Africa continent strongly opposes geoengineering technologies, especially solar radiation modification, through the Solar Geoengineering International Non-Use Agreement, supported by the 90th African Ministerial Conference on the Environment, AMCEN, since 2023. And the 20th meeting of AMCEN has reaffirmed its decision to support the international agreement on the non-use. We see geoengineering proponents increasingly attempting to normalize geoengineering and confusing the public debate while attempting to take advantage of African policymakers and youths before they are fully informed. Africa is not a laboratory of this risky technology. We strongly support the call for a global governance mechanism for non-use for solar radiation management and expect further African leadership towards the establishment of such an international solar geoengineering non-use agreement. We insist that attempts at legitimizing notions that geoengineering technologies can have a role to play be effectively countered and exposed in all relevant fora. So multinational fora such as UNFPC subsidiary bodies and conferences, conference of parties must not allow for attempts to normalize solar geoengineering and portray this dangerous technology as a necessary option for the global south, especially for Africa. We also call on our fellow activists in social movement and civil society organizations across all the sectors and issues to join us in our mobilization against geoengineering and for genuine and just transitions. The geoengineering technologies, especially the solar radiation modification, don't meet Africa's realities in fighting climate change. The potential risk and impact on solar radiation modification will rather destroy communities' livelihoods and agriculture, lead to more water scarcity, and to extreme temperature rising as part of the termination shock. The real solution to climate change are in the hand of people and the grassroots communities. Indigenous peoples and local communities have the solution for the global warming. These include the use of their traditional knowledge through agroecology and forest conservation practices. Africa must be free from all forms of colonialism and oppression. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame. Thank you, Kwame. I hand it over to Kaveri, who will speak from Asia.
Thank you, Neha, and thank you, Kwame. As mentioned by my colleague from Africa here, the expansion of carbon markets under Article 6, it does pose a great risk for ecosystems, for communities in the global south. In the Asia-Pacific region as well, land, oceans, rivers, and coastal ecosystems are being increasingly pitched as tools to fight global warming. This narrow focus on climate helps to promote a technological approach to increase the Earth's capacity to absorb carbon dioxide with a view to selling carbon credits generated commercially. However, this approach ignores the complexity and the fragility of these ecosystems, especially their key role as source and support for vital food chains for plants, animals, and humans, and their intrinsic relationship to traditional livelihoods that maintain and increase biodiversity. Spurred by the prospect of profiting in the carbon market, dozens of new geoengineering projects have emerged in the Asia-Pacific, mostly either funded or promoted by actors in the global north. At the UNFCCC, the carbon market mechanism under Article 6 and concepts like the blue carbon discussed in the Ocean and Climate Dialogues are helping to promote the development of risky marine, solar, and land-based technologies. The Asia-Pacific region is already in the risk of developing and deploying of these technologies pushed by actors in the global north. Large-scale biochar projects are already underway, which will potentially threaten to occupy grasslands and forests in order to generate carbon credits to be sold to polluters. In the fragile ecosystem of the upper Himalayas, synthetic reflective materials are scattered in the glaciers in order to reduce sunlight from entering the atmosphere. Projects also aim to deploy marine geoengineering techniques, such as large-scale seaweed cultivation in the Indian Ocean and sink the biomass in the deep ocean, which scientists have warned that it can alter the integrity of the marine and oceanic ecosystem. All these proposals introduce a wide spectrum of new threats to the Earth's natural ecosystem, their biodiversity, and livelihoods dependent on them. It is also concerning for the Asia-Pacific that deep tech agencies, such as the UK's Advanced Research and Innovation Agency, ARIA, which announced to invest tens of millions of dollars on a multi-year geoengineering programs, have surprised the world, and they have established connections in the Asia-Pacific. Climate scientists associated with the Solar Geoengineering Non-Use Agreement, or the SGNUA, warned that the ARIA program constitutes a new escalation in the push to normalize this dangerous set of technologies and potentially reach planetary boundaries. So what we are witnessing right now is actually a new form of colonialism through through the use of technology to reproduce colonial power relations. With so many projects emerging in the Asia Pacific, we believe that the UNFCCC needs to act now to uphold the precautionary principle enshrined in the Rio Convention and the CBD moratorium on geoengineering, which was reaffirmed in 2024. UNFCCC must also recognize the decisions of the LCLP, or the London Convention and Protocol, and uphold the precautionary approach towards marine geoengineering techniques. In the ocean and climate dialogues, interventions that deliberately try to alter marine ecosystems under blue carbon and marine CDR schemes must be excluded. Now, more than ever, we must push for real solutions such as agroecology, solutions centered on the rights of women, indigenous peoples, peasants, and local communities, who are the true guardians of ecosystems. Together, we must fight against powers of colonialism that drive hunger, war, and ecological collapse, and affirm the power of peoples to build economies of care, solidarity, and determination. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaveri. I hand it over to Gina.
Thank you so much. My name is Gina Cortez Valderrama, and I am speaking on behalf of the Women and Gender constituency. And perhaps I would like to start with a little bit of a personal story here. A few years ago, I was invited to join the youth engagement group of the Climate Overshoot Commission. This Overshoot Commission is a self-proclaimed commission that is advancing on the idea of solar radiation management. And this commission as well is steered by some of the brains that have engineered unequal regimes in institutions such as the World Trade Organization. And I left this engagement from the very early stage, not because I was not really willing to engage in difficult conversations, but because what I saw there and what was happening inside that space was the orchestrated colonial normalization. It was picking up very specific youth profiles, with intersectional identities. You had Black, you have Asian, you have from different regions, you have people working in UNICEF, you have people working at the UNFCCC, like the full spectrum of diversity, global South voices, And also it brought together former politicians without any extensive knowledge of geoengineering, carbon dioxide removal, not at all, that had not engaged in the topic. And what they wanted to do is, or what they have been doing, and not only in this commission, but in also other spaces, is to instrumentalize such conversations to make this process seem open, diverse, legitimate, and treating these different identities as pure decorative objects to access also funding, and that was the case, for them to access funding to a children's fund, because they had now a youth group, right? So when I also named this publicly, it was very uncomfortable for some. What we saw, or what I saw in that room, was the same logic that also we can see operating in these rooms, at the same scale, at the real time, and it's how is this deliberate creeping of techno fixes into the political agenda, as a substitute for just an equitable phase out of fossil fuel that we actually need. Is the replacement of that. And what we see in that conversation is just colonialism reloaded. Geoengineering is not a fix to climate change, starting with the fact that what we have to change is not the climate, but the system that is actually burning it. And geoengineering is then a political choice. And it's a political choice that governments are sending the message, or will send the message to people, that it is preferable to risk unprecedented harm to the planetary systems that to confront the fossil fuel economy and the corporate power that is sustaining that. That's the message that geoengineering is sending right now. Solar radiation management, carbon dioxide removal, stratospheric aerosol injection, these are all intentional steps along a deployment pathway, advancing under conditions of deliberate opacity, funded by technology billionaires, no? The same corporate power that we see, and firms with documented ties to military and intelligence infrastructure. What we have seen in the case of Israel, targeting as well other territories. No, we can see as well other territories that are targets such as Mali, Brazil, Thailand, across the global south. And all of these without the free, prior, and informed consent of communities whose lives and ecosystems will be affected. No, it's just having the world as a laboratory to experiment without recognizing the rights of people, without recognizing the lands, without recognizing the livelihoods. And private companies from the global north have attempted as well ocean fertilization on the coast of Peru, Chile, and the Galapagos. We have seen as well Volkswagen hail cannons in Puebla, Mexico, that cause droughts over thousands of hectares of farmlands. No? Farmers are losing as well their harvest while a car manufacturer is protecting their vehicles. And for instance, in Brazil, Petrobras is already injecting carbon dioxide into oil fields under the name of carbon capture, while continuing to extract more oil and trying to market it abroad with a climate-friendly image. Solar radiation management modeling studies predict that a stratospheric aerosol injection would reduce precipitation across Mexico, Central America, northern parts of Latin America, no? Regions that which their communities are already heavily exposed to drought, to water scarcity, and to food insecurity as well. And this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable, is not an acceptable risk that is being decided, that is being written by the actors who not will live with the consequences. And meanwhile, initiatives like, for example, the Degrees Initiative present themselves as funds to support Global South research, on SRM, dressed with the costume of capacity building, because we have to spread capacity building, because the people of the South is not empowered enough, and because they do not have the knowledge, so we have to come to the territories to tell them what they have to do. And of course, what they have to do is to follow the script that capitalism and colonialism is posing, And what we have seen, and has there also been evidence, and many groups have been advocating and call out, is how this is the manufacturing of Southern scientific legitimacy for exactly that. For instance, many African governments have rejected, as our comrade was saying, they have called as well, academics have called as well for a non-use agreement. And even communities from Alaska to Sweden also have refused on the grounds of human rights abuse. And I would invite you to check as well the Geoengineering Monitor website, to check all these different facts, to check all these different stories, to check the evidence that is already happening, where you can change it by your own self, how the colonial machinery has been crafted in the South. And we are here then not to ask how to govern a technology that should not exist. We're not here for that. We're not going to ask governments to start thinking about governing something that is already posing a harm, and that we do not need to further advance in that conversation. And that's why the Women and Gender Constituency, alongside many networks, calls on the UNFCCC and calls also to all UN bodies to recognize that, for instance, solar geoengineering is a category of a technology that poses unprecedented risks, and that is advancing without consent of justice frameworks, without having into consideration international human rights law, and that it's as well functioning as a deliberate deferral of that structural transformation that we need. We support the solar geoengineering non-use agreement. We support as well the real solutions that are already happening on the ground by different communities in their territories with their knowledge, with generations that have come with different terms. Because Latin America and the South are not laboratories. Our bodies are not data points. Our bodies are as well not numbers in the accounts of billionaires. Our territories are not available for experiments that are protecting the fossil fuel economy while exposing us to new forms of planetary risk. As feminists, we will keep holding the line, and from Latin America, we are also calling for our governments to strengthen South-South cooperation, to strengthen South-South knowledge sharing, to strengthen as well that force from the South, because we are not in the need of capacity building and a pathway that are just going to plunder our territories deeper into that ecological collapse. We are here to connect, we are here to showcase what people power means, and that means holding the light and fighting against the unprecedented risks for our planetary health. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Are there any questions from the floor? Please identify yourself before you ask a question.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I don't have a question as such, but maybe I'd like to very quickly add and recognize that there is this report that was launched, was published a couple of years ago by the Human Rights Council Advisory Committee that actually recognizes that geoengineering would have a massive and disproportionate impact on indigenous peoples, but also they warn in that report, quote unquote, so I'm being meticulous about this, that geoengineering could seriously interfere with the enjoyment of human rights of millions or perhaps billions of people. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay. With that, I'd probably like to wrap up. What we've heard very clearly here is that resistance to geoengineering is growing across regions that are just not a concern of one region, but also a shared struggle. The strength of this moment lies in South-South solidarity, communities across Asia, Africa, and Latin America standing together to reject geoengineering. We will continue to highlight these risks, the risks of these technologies and amplify voices from the Global South. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Our speakers will be available outside for any questions or interviews. We would also like to invite you tomorrow for our next press conference, where we'll highlight the threats of blue economy and marine geoengineering. Thank you.